Good evening, everybody. This is Victor Frost coming to you live from the Steven Universe studio in lovely Los Angeles, California. So, what do you think? Was it worth the wait? What am I saying? Of course it was! Oh! No. We're not doing that. Let's do this right, shall we? Hey everyone, welcome to Steven Universe, the show where we talk about the universe of Steven Universe. I'm your host, Victor Frost. First things first, the news. First off, Kineticon was just such a blast. I saw so many awesome Steven Universe cosplays. Steven Universe the panel got filled to capacity, and then this happened.
Oh my, it seems Pearl is finally quenching that everlasting thirst. She's so thirsty. It's unbelievable how thirsty she really is.
Yes, while people were still filing in for the panel, Pearl was just so thirsty. With all those roses around, she just had to get a drink. Cosplayers are just some of the coolest people out there, and that was seriously one of the best Pearl cosplays I've seen. In other news, Steven Universe is in another break, with new episodes starting back up on August 6th. Thankfully, it looks like it won't be another Steven bomb, which means I can rest easy, at least. This is going to be like when a character says what could possibly go wrong, isn't it? Yeah. Speaking of Steven bombs, the ratings info is in, and Sardonyx was, all told, kind of middle of the road in terms of ratings. Averaging 1.76 million viewers per episode, it's down about 4.5% from the last Steven bomb. This isn't a big deal since it handily beat every other rival network's original programming on any given night. The only one that stood a chance was Gravity Falls, which beat it out on Monday night with a rating of 0.78 over Steven U's 0.51 in the women 12 to 34 demo, but even then, it still only matched Steven in the much more important people 18 to 49 demo and lost to us by 0.07 in the P 18 to 34. All of these are live plus same day. I should make a video explaining ratings at some point. Anyways, let's see what you guys have been up to. It's time for a review. The differences between gems and humans are vast, and both might seem confusing or strange to the other. Humans by PokeGirl333 is a third-person look at Pearl's internal evaluation of how she feels about humans. This is a short and sweet fanfiction that takes place during the short, bittersweet moments at the end of Sworn to the Sword. There's no dialogue, and the whole thing can be read in a few minutes, but that makes it no less heartfelt or raw as it progresses through a voyeuristic view on Pearl's own recounting of the different feelings she's had towards humanity in her life. Through the course of it, you can follow how and when she formed each view and why, from confusion to ambivalence, to hate, to love, to understanding. This work really builds a deeper understanding of Pearl's character. So, what's the verdict? I'm giving this 5 out of 5 Stevens. In addition to the story itself being of high quality, this tasty little one-shot had no major technical errors, which is sadly rare among all the fanfictions I've read. So go ahead and hit the link in the doobly-doo and read Humans by PokeGirl333. It's definitely worth your time. Now it's time for us to put on our hip waders and look at all 5 episodes of the Steven Bomb Sardonyx and see what we learned. If you haven't yet seen the episodes Cry for Help, Keystone Motel, Onion Friend, Historical Friction, and Friendship, now's your chance to pause this video, go watch that one, then come back. Don't worry, we'll wait. This is your spoiler alert. New episodes, new lore. Let's see what we learned. So, if you remember back to the first Steven bomb, I ended up reviewing The Return and Jailbreak as a single episode, due to the tight interconnectedness of the plot, and I'm basically going to be doing the same for all 5 episodes of this Steven Bomb. I say basically because while Onion Friend and Historical Friction do have their share of arc-related elements, I'm going to be glossing over most of their episodic content. Instead, I'm only going to be focusing on the parts that specifically deal with the primary story arc. This way we can really look at the implications of the events in the arc as it spans all 5 episodes, instead of getting bogged down in the minor ups and downs of each individual episode's arc. You know, I keep throwing that word around, arc. What is an arc? The narrative arc is the structure of the story. It's the rise and fall of tension, the pace and tone of a plot, and even though the word arc might suggest a curve, most of the time it's more like a roller coaster that rises and falls with things like obstacles and achievements, conflicts and resolutions. We start at the beginning. This is where we establish the routine, the baseline, the status quo. Now, this being a series, we as the audience have a pretty good understanding of what the status quo is, but there's still enough information to tell a first-time viewer what's up. In fact, it's in the opener.
We are the crystal gems, we'll always save the day.
You know the rest. Now, it's important to realize that the opener is only helpful if you start at Cry for Help. If a first-time viewer started at, say, Keystone Motel, they wouldn't know why Pearl was getting the cold shoulder from Garnet until Ruby and Sapphire started talking about it later on. They would be starting in media res, or in the middle of the story. Independent of any other information, this cements the position of Cry for Help as the starting point of this arc. Now, after the story's been rolling for a bit, something happens, and everything changes. This is called the inciting incident, and it's the event or decision that begins the story's problem. Up until this point, everything is okay. The gems are doing their thing, trying to find Peridot, and it's kinda an issue that they haven't been able to, but there's a sense of normalcy. Even when Peridot activates the communications hub, it's still just a temporary fire that needs to be put out, and it's handily dealt with. The inciting incident comes when Pearl decides to repair the hub, and even though we don't actually see the first time she does it, this is what creates the problem that drives the story from here on out. Okay, so we've had this graph here for a while, and I think it's time to show you the axes. At the top here is good fortune, and on the bottom is ill fortune. When good things happen, when there are good feels, the line goes up. And when bad things happen, when there are bad feels, the line goes down. And the line travels from the beginning of the story to the end. Now, much like how minor victories or obstacles in one person's life, like buying a car or getting into an accident, might be colossal to another person, how far up or down the line goes is all relative to the story. As Kurt Vonnegut said,
now this is an exercise in relativity, really. Is the shape of the curves are what matters and not their origins.
Mind you, this is not the only way to graph a story arc. Some people prefer to graph it by the level of tension or action, or put multiple lines to show the relative arc or importance of each character and how they interact. I like this type because where the story moves in relation to the established average, the status quo, tells you, in my opinion, much more about the story, its tone, pacing, the level of drama, etc., than just how tense or active things are. Now, before Pearl reassembled the hub, the line starts to go up and peaks when Garnet and Pearl finish dismantling it the first time as Sardonyx. And why shouldn't it go up? Pearl and Garnet are all excited and Steven's spazzing out. Everything isn't just okay, everything is awesome.
Giant woman!
But just as soon as they fuse again to take it down a second time, after the inciting incident of Pearl putting it back together, the line starts to go down. This is when things really start to go south emotionally. It's when Amethyst has her song, and when Steven decides that they should stake out the hub. The curve gets sharper when they see Pearl fixing it, and sharper still when Pearl lies about it to their faces. Finally, it basically turns into a sheer vertical drop when everything is exposed to Garnet. It's after this that the status quo has been completely shattered. Pearl and Garnet aren't speaking. The tension in the temple is so thick you could cut it with a knife. It's so bad that the world of crying breakfast friends is starting to look preferable to Steven and Amethyst compared to their life as it stands. At some point, I'll have to talk about some of the minor points in this episodes and this arc as a whole, really, but while they're really interesting, for now, let's put that off and stick to the primary op. We've got a lot to cover and there's not a lot of time. Anyways, at this point, it really couldn't get any worse. Things are so rough emotionally in the temple that Garnet goes on the trip with Steven and Greg to put some space between her and Pearl. And to Steven, things are kinda looking up, but the internal turmoil between Ruby and Sapphire about whether or not to forgive Pearl is so bad that Garnet just comes apart. This is a big deal. Garnet is the grounding force in the Crystal Gems. She provides assurance, leadership, and a stabilizing force to the team. She balances out Pearl and Amethyst's opposite extremes and brings everyone together. So, like Greg says,
something pretty serious must be going on if it made Garnet split up.
But oh, it gets worse. See, it wasn't just Garnet that wanted to get away from the tension. Steven wanted to get away too. They both wanted, at least for a little while, to regain that sense of normalcy, to reapproach the status quo. But the splitting of Ruby and Sapphire and their hostility towards each other made the situation seem even worse to Steven. A literal embodiment of love was being torn apart by the situation, and when even the best breakfast in the world, at the best diner in the world, couldn't solve the problem...
Go and... Ah, jeez.
Steven is upset and angry and sad, and everything is most definitely not awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, we have officially hit bedrock in our narrative arc. But the upshot of hitting rock bottom is that the only way left to go is up, and indeed we do. Ruby and Sapphire's reconciliation and ultimately their reformation into Garnet is a signifier to Steven and to us of a beginning of the shift back towards the status quo.
She's speaking to me again. Well, kind of.
And the arc keeps going up as the good feels continue through Onion Friend and historical friction. First, Amethyst gets some much-needed reassurance from Vidalia, and Pearl gets an unintentional pep talk from Steven on why life is hard, but worthwhile because of it.
When did you get so smart?
And the hits keep coming as they finally track down Peridot, but with every flow comes an ebb. In their initial encounter with Peridot, Pearl is completely out of sync with the rest of the team, operating, it seems, out of a different script. It gets to the point that even Steven has to push her out of the way in the middle of the battle. She calls Peridot desperate, but in reality, Pearl is the desperate one, and her desperation makes her rash. And not taking the time to think things through, she makes dumb mistake after dumb mistake. And every chance she sees at redeeming herself just seems to get away, making her more desperate and frustrated, ultimately leading to her and Garnet getting snared in Peridot's pit trap. At this point, we have reached the climax. Things aren't as bad as they've been on the whole, but in terms of needing to resolve the issue, the stakes have never been higher. In the end, we see that it's not just a matter of it being fun to be Sardonyx, but that Pearl's lack of self-esteem and poor self-image, in spite of any airs she may put up, drives her to seek the perceived strength in others. Those same issues also blind her to the weaknesses of those she sees as strong. To her, even though intellectually she may know otherwise, Rose and Garnet aren't just stronger, they're literally perfect, having no faults. And so being Sardonyx isn't just fun, it's escapism from her own perceived weakness-riddled self into a perfected form. Now, Garnet does her best to set Pearl straight and things are better, but Pearl needs to re-earn her trust, and even when they escape as Sardonyx, we see that Sardonyx is much more serious, no longer her former bombastic self. But we've finally reached a denouement and some level of resolution, even if we're not exactly back to the former status quo. And Amethyst fully mirrors the audience's relief in that, finally, it's over. Now you may be asking, why aren't we back to the status quo? I mean, the story's over, right? Well, yeah, but good art mimics life, and after a major event like, say, getting a car or a breakup, does your life ever get back to exactly the way it was? No, you're pretty much always at least a little better or a little worse off. In this case, they're a little worse because there's still some damage to Pearl and Garnet's relationship that needs to be repaired. And believe it or not, this is good. Not hitting the end of episode, or in this case, end of arc reset button, means that the character's actions and the actions of others can have an effect on them, and that they have the opportunity to really learn and grow. This is what brings characters to life and makes for a great story. And that's what we learned this time on Steven Universe Universe. I know there's a lot of stuff we didn't cover, and we'll get back to those at a later time, but join us next week on Steven Universe Behind the Screen as we enter part 2 on how music is used in media. I'm Victor Frost, and I'll see you next time.